It's a very warm welcome to the Global Sports Channel Motorsport Show, our first episode today. I've got two wonderful guests joining me from, let's say, the other side of the world from where I am. We've got Nikki and Christopher. Welcome to you both to the show today, and let's get to know you a little bit. So, Nikki, why don't you tell everybody who you are, where you are, and a little bit about your interest in the world of motorsport.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Nikki Daly, and I'm from Ireland, if you can tell by my accent. I grew up in motorsport. I've a dad who was racing for over 20 years here nationally in Ireland, but also my uncle was a Formula One driver for Williams back in the late 70s, early 80s. So I've been around motorsport my whole entire life. That's always been a passion for me, and I suppose I didn't go down the competition route of being a driver like my family members, but I did study motorsport engineering, and I've worked for a racing team in the United States in the IndyCar, on the IndyCar ladder program. And I've also recently, in the last couple of years, set up a platform to encourage more women and young girls into motorsport, and the platform is called Formula Female.
Fantastic.
So that's a little bit about me.
Well, that's great. We're going to talk a little bit more about that during the show today, Nikki. And Derek Daly was your uncle, or is your uncle, and he raced in over 60 Formula One Grand Prix during his career. And I'm sure he's got some great stories to be able to share as well. And he's probably told some around the family dinner table, no doubt, has he, Nikki, during the years?
He has. Yes, he actually has so many stories. He's told him many times that he needs to write a book. So he's in the process of doing that now to capture all those, some amazing stories and some kind of wild and outrageous stories as well. But, he started his time, with his career trying to make a bit of money down in Australia in the iron ore mines. So he spent, I think it was about 6 months down there with David Kennedy trying to come up with some money to go racing. So there's a good few stories around that we'll leave for the book.
I bet there is. Now, Nikki's going to come back on the show at a later date because she's also preparing herself at the moment to go to the Tokyo Olympic Games as a representative in the ladies hockey team from Ireland. So you're an outstanding young person, Nikki, and we're going to have you back on the show to talk about your hockey journey, because who knows, you might score that winning goal in Tokyo that's going to bring home a medal for Ireland. Let's head over to Christopher. Christopher, where are you talking to us from this fine morning?
I'm in sunny Leicestershire in England, so about 30 minutes from Donington Park, and it is actually sunny today.
I was going to say, were you just throwing that word sunny out there, because it's not something you'd use very much in that part of the world, is it?
Yeah, normally it's ironic, isn't it? But here it is actually a beautiful day. It's not warm. I can't claim it's warm, but it is.
Well, Donington Park, a lot of history in that motorsport circuit, that's for sure, over the years. Not only with racing cars, of course, but motorbikes. There's a strong history there of motorbikes as well. Tell us about your history in motorsport. What have you been up to in the game, and why are you so passionate about it, Christopher?
Yeah, so I started racing as a kid in karting, and finished at racing something called ICA, which was kind of the second top level at the time behind Formula A. And then sort of finished that when I was 18, 19. My parents said, you've got to get a real job and go to university. So off I went. But university, it's like you'd study for like 3 months a year, don't you? In reality, you spend the rest of the time on holiday. So during that period, I worked as a mechanic for a company called Zytec, building cars for Le Mans. So we did that for 4 years, so throughout university and the year afterwards. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of, again, had a conversation with parents, you've got to get a real job. So off I went into the world of marketing, the commercial side of motorsport. Moved over to Honda F1 just before they pulled the plug and became Brawn. Mm-hmm. And then when that went sort of under, I moved over to Ferrari. So I moved over to Italy and worked in the marketing department over there. And then I've sort of worked myself since, really, doing sort of marketing and communications in motorsport.
Well, we are going to be chatting about the race coming up this weekend at Imola on the show today, and one could say that's in Ferrari's backyard, isn't it? It's the Tifosi are going to be there in a lot of numbers, I'm sure, this weekend, regardless of what COVID's doing. Now, it's been an unusual 18 months or so in the world of Formula One, hasn't it, with COVID and all the different changes that have been going on, but I must say they've been pretty successful in being able to maintain this bubble and keeping the whole show on the road. What are your thoughts around that, both of you, in terms of, have you been impressed with what Formula One's actually been able to maintain in terms of keeping a show going over the last 18 months?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been unbelievable. If you look at what other sports properties have done or not managed to do in that time, I think some of them have sort of ploughed on with, not particularly great results. There are some sports that we all know that continued and got quite a lot of flack for that. But I think what Formula One in particular and motorsport in general has done really well is carry on, get a huge amount of races done, but without any particularly negative. So they, I think they've managed it very well whilst really pushing the boundaries of what they could actually get done. So I think if you were a team or a partner in Formula One, you'd look back on 2020 as a very difficult season, but you'd say, actually, we salvaged a huge amount from that. And I think, this time last year, there were quite a few teams that were really, really on the precipice if that didn't happen. So I think it was more than just, they didn't have the opportunity. The overheads in F1 team now is so high, they really didn't have the opportunity to just say, yeah, well, we'll call this year off, like some of the junior Formula can. Because I think we probably would have lost, at least 2 teams and probably 3, which would have had a significant impact on the future viability of F1. So I think it was an unbelievable job and fantastic.
Yeah, what impact does it have on engineers, Nikki, in that space in terms of when they're planning a season? Is there kind of some sense of stability when you know what the schedule's going to be versus this kind of chaotic rescheduling that we've seen over the last 12 months? Does that affect the engineers in a big way?
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it affects everyone in the team. Like, just from my own experience of being in a team that's trying to compete during COVID, it's, the unknown is the hardest part. And, you're doing all your work behind the scenes in order to get out there to compete. So I can imagine how frustrating it would be if you're trying to do all this preparation and then all of a sudden it just gets cut, or, you're not sure what's going to happen. And they've obviously got their season planned out from a long time beforehand, just like most professional teams do. So yeah, I think everyone who's involved in the team would be affected by it. But I think that they've done a great job in maintaining the season to go ahead and keep it that everyone's been able to stay safe and can continue.
And before we get into talking about the first race, which took place in Bahrain this year, which was unusual as well, because we're used to having the Formula One circus come down under to kick off the season every year. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. We had Melbourne going into a bit of a spate of COVIDness. And as a result of that, it was decided to have the first race in Bahrain, which was also interesting because it's where they had the testing this year as well. So that the teams got to test on the track that they actually had the first race. Much of a benefit for the teams to do that, Christopher, to have the first race and the testing in the same location?
Possibly. I mean, it's the same for everyone, I suppose. So it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. I think it's always, I think you often find you go to Melbourne, you go to Albert Park for the first race of the season, and it's, whatever happens there never follows on, does it? We go to the first race, it's mega in Melbourne, and we think, oh, this is it, and it's going to be a crazy year, and then it never follows on. So I think what we probably do have is, if you look at testing and then you look at the race, there are some fairly clear lines there of where people are, and I think Bahrain is more typical of a Grand Prix track and more representative. So I think it doesn't necessarily help, but I think it gives us a truer picture of where everyone is.
Yeah, exactly. Nikki, there was a lot of changes coming into this year within the driver lineup for a start, and I was pretty excited actually when I heard last year that we were going to get some new blood on the grid this year and some old blood coming back as well in the form of Fernando Alonso, who's, I must say, one of my favourite drivers. And if nothing else, he'll create some controversy along the way, that's for sure, once he gets himself back well known along the grid again. But what about you in terms of expectations for this year before they did start racing? Was there any team that you kind of had your eye on that you were hoping were going to do really well this year?
Yeah, well, like you, I mean, I'm a big Fernando fan, so I was delighted to see him coming back. I know he had, I saw a quote from him recently saying that he felt he was one of the best, if not the best driver there, which I think is a big statement to make. But I think it shows that he knows what he can do himself, and I think that the team that he's with looks like they can do quite well. And I'm looking forward to seeing him doing well. I suppose the other guy that I'm a big fan of is probably Perez, and he's made a big jump to Red Bull now, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he gets on there. I think Bahrain was a little bit hard for him. Maybe he was just kind of trying to get used to the car, get adjusted or whatever, but he still had a good race in finishing fifth from the back of the grid. So I think I'd like to see him really, if he can, challenge Verstappen, or what that challenge will look like. And obviously Lewis Hamilton as well, challenge him, because I'd like to see it just be a little bit different at the top this year.
Yeah.
So I think, from the new people coming in, like Yuki Tsunoda and Mick Schumacher, it'll be interesting to see what they can do. Obviously, they'll be I think the Alpha Tauri is going to be maybe quite good. So it'll be interesting to see what he can do. And then, Mick Schumacher will probably just be trying to, get used to the car and do a good job at maybe the further end of the field. So, yeah.
How about you, Christopher? Before we kicked off in Bahrain, did you have any expectations that, all the hype from testing, that Red Bull were ahead of everybody, and, Alpha Tauri, as Nikki just said, they did some impressive stuff during testing, but we've seen all that before, haven't we? And when it comes to the race, the real time, did you have any high hopes for any drivers or teams in particular before the start of the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think testing was really positive, wasn't it? Because for the first time in a long time, it looked like Mercedes really did have a challenger. And I know last year, it looked like they were struggling in testing, but then they came back with, effectively a new car and smashed it, as you would expect. And I think, so I was pretty positive going to the first race that Red Bull would be there or thereabouts, as we, saw happen, which is fantastic. I think, like Nikki said, it's great to see the new drivers in. So I'm really pleased to see Tsunoda there. I think anyone who's watched him in the junior formulas will be excited that he's on the grid, and we saw that again with some pretty nice moves that he pulled in Bahrain. For me, growing up, I was always a big Michael Schumacher fan, so it's fantastic to see Mick on the grid, and I thought he did well at the weekend. I thought it's the Haas is clearly a really tough car, and I think he's going to have his hands full, but it'll be a good experience for him, and hopefully within the industry and outside of the industry, the fans give him the time to prove that, because I think he's in a difficult position this year, and I don't think it's going to get much better for him this year.
Yeah.
So that's good, and obviously it'd be great to have Aston Martin. That team, I think originally as Jordan, Racing Point, and Force India, and I think that's got a lot of history in the sport and a lot of good people there. And I think with a brand like Aston, it'd be fantastic to get that back kind of where it deserves to be as a team. I think it'd be an exciting narrative to see where it goes, particularly next year when the regs change. They have the opportunity to really push forward.
Yeah, we'll have a little bit of a chat about Aston Martin as we go through the show today, because with four-time world champion there, Sebastian Vettel, going over to the team, there was a lot of hype around this could be his second coming, and I think in that first race in Bahrain, on my opinion anyway, they really underperformed, and they've got some serious issues, I think, from an engineering point of view. But let's talk about that a little bit later on. You spoke about the regulations, Christopher, and I think for people watching and listening into the show today, it might be a good idea if we just talk a little bit about the changes on the regulations this year, because it's a bit of a transition year, isn't it? We've got major regulation changes coming through in 2022, so I think a lot of the teams were just treading water a little bit. However, it does seem that the regulation changes this year have made a difference to some of the cars, particularly the Mercedes, obviously. What are your thoughts around that, Nikki?
I think I'm not 100% sure on what all the regulation changes are, but I think the cap, the budget cap, will be interesting to see how much teams can close the gap, and it'll be interesting to see what it will be next year. I suppose Christopher might have more to add on that.
Christopher, what are your thoughts around some of the engineering changes and regulation changes? And I talk specifically about the rake, right? We've got this high rake, low rake system. So do you want to maybe first of all explain that for people who are maybe not so much au fait with Formula One?
Yeah, rake gate. So it's the angle of the car effectively. So if you look at the Red Bull, and you look at the floor, it's very much at an angle like this, and it looks unusual to what we're used to seeing with racing cars, where you have a very low ride height and very consistent. And the Mercedes is more similar to that. So the regulations basically that have come in have sort of penalised low rake cars effectively, which is the Mercedes, and also interestingly is the Aston Martin. So I think that's probably the root of maybe some of their. You never really know without being in the team, but maybe that's the root of some of their issues within the car this year. But I think the teams are also limited, obviously, with the tokens that they had this year. So they had a certain amount of tokens, that they could change this year, and I think that's provided an interesting challenge for the engineers as to what they focus on. And obviously some teams like McLaren, with an engine change, had to use more tokens to accommodate the move to Mercedes powertrain, and others had a bit more freedom. But I think there's two elements. One of them is what you're legally allowed to do with the tokens, and the other one is budget-wise and resource-wise, what you want to put into a car that will race the season. And then effectively you have to have a completely different philosophy and approach to the 2022 season. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is a little bit of a result of the regulation change, and I think we're seeing a little bit of a result of the tokens and a little result of people kind of treading water in this year ahead of a huge regulation change next year.
So do you both think we're going to get a real true reflection this year on where the teams are at? Because if you look at someone like the Haas team, for instance, right, they've openly said in all their media throughout, even before testing started, that they're just basically going to put all their eggs into next year's car, and there's going to be very limited development. So do you think we're going to see a bit of a flat season this year because the cars aren't going to be developed at the same speed?
I think if Red Bull weren't so close to Mercedes, that would have been a risk. I think looking at testing and looking at race one, because it's so tight, I think at least Mercedes and Red Bull will continue to push throughout the season. I think if we got to Bahrain and Mercedes walked away with it, and we went to Imola and Mercedes walked away with it, and we got 3 or 4 races in and they were just out of sight, I think a lot of teams would get right. Well, we'll kind of write this one off, if you like, and move on to next year. I think one of the things to bear in mind is that in Formula One, you can't really afford to write off a year, because the prize money is so crucial to the budgets of running. So, in other series, in WEC or DTM or whatever, you might get to the point where 3/4 way through the year, the teams kind of tailor off a little bit, and some of them even pull out. But obviously in F1 you can't do that, because your finishing position and the points that you accumulate have a direct link to your budget for the following year.
Yeah.
So I don't think we will. I think every year in Formula One counts, and I think what it will do though is give opportunities for teams like McLaren to really have a great year this year. So I think McLaren and maybe Alpha Tauri will have a good opportunity this year.
Nikki, what's your thoughts around that? Do you think we're going to see a flatter this year because of less development, or do you think we're going to see some standout surprises as well?
Yeah, I think what Christopher mentioned there at the end about it, every year counts. And I think that, trying to just put all your eggs in one basket for next year, you're losing out on what you could probably achieve this year. So I think they need to try and use this to springboard them into next year and what they want to try and work on, or where their focus is going to be. I don't think it's a case of just kind of going, oh well, this is what it is this year and we've got it sorted for next year, because it's probably not going to end up like that, and all the other teams are probably going to be building going into next year anyway. So if you kind of have that approach, maybe you're going to start further behind anyway. So I think there could be a few surprises in there. I think with individual drivers and in teams. I'm really excited to see what Red Bull can do, and I think some of the other teams, like if Aston Martin can get back to where they were, and the Alpha Tauri, seeing them challenge as well. I think it'll be good for the spectators anyway.
You've mentioned Alpha Tauri a couple of times already, Nikki. You've got some money on them, have you, this year?
No, I just yeah, it's just something that I keep an eye on. I suppose I think they could do quite well. Be nice to see them up there challenging as well. So
Yeah. So for people listening who may not know who the Alpha Tauri team is, it's the old Toro Rosso team that's been, I guess, the Red Bull Junior team for many years now. And they've rebranded themselves. Got a couple of great drivers in Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda. And this guy Tsunoda is just setting the whole grid alight, isn't he? The guy brings a lot of energy. He's got a good vibe around him. He's really getting in there and giving it a go. And I haven't heard a bad word about the guy yet from all the things I've seen online and watching the show. Any thoughts around him in particular? Do we see him as a future world champion, maybe?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, he's got a lot going on, isn't he? I think he probably needs, like any young driver coming into the sport, I think he needs a little bit of calming down, and a little bit of, if you listen to his radio, he gets quite wound up about things. But I mean, that's kind of usual, I think. I think, we see it a lot, don't we, that we get some really exciting Japanese drivers coming into the sport. I mean, I remember in 2009, I think, when Kobayashi came in. And in Brazil, when he was racing bottom, it was, very, very exciting. And we saw it with Sato earlier in the decade. But the challenge always with Japanese drivers, I guess, is coming in and keeping that approach and that aggressive approach, but also building a race and building through to the result at the end of it. So, and putting that together for a season. So I think Tsunoda's got absolutely everything that he needs at the moment. So his trajectory is very good, and I think, hopefully he's got the right sort of temperament to thrive in that Red Bull environment, because we've seen some fantastic drivers come in Red Bull and go out the other end basically and really struggle. So I hope that he will be given the time to develop, which, to be honest with you, I think with the way the drivers are in Red Bull at the moment, so with Verstappen and Perez, I think he will be given that time. I think they're going to be kicking Perez out anytime soon. So I think, and I think up against Gasly, if Tsunoda performs against Gasly this year, that's a really good yardstick for him. So we'll know where he is, I think, by the end of the season.
Yeah. What about your thoughts around that, Nikki?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Christopher's saying, and I think that, being in that team being the junior Red Bull team, although they might not be making any changes to the Red Bull team, I think they always have this point to prove, I suppose, as the drivers in there. And like we've seen with Pierre Gasly, he obviously had a tough time at Red Bull and then came back to Alpha Tauri, and he's kind of gone from strength to strength since he got back there. And I think that it's a great team to be in, that you're always motivated because your top team is doing so well, so you're always trying to match what they're doing, or at least close the gap to them. And I suppose, like, being paired with Pierre, he's going to be pushed all the way. And I think it's going to be exciting to see what they can both do. See how close they can maybe challenge their top team.
All I say about Red Bull is when Helmut Marko's there, as long as he's there, there's change about to happen soon. I can tell you that much. Yeah, there's always something going on in the background with that guy. But look, I just getting back to Perez for a second, I think that was one of the smartest moves in the off season, was to get him over to Red Bull to partner Max Verstappen. I've got a huge amount of respect and admiration for Sergio. I think that he's going to be showing a lot of people up this year. I think that drive at Bahrain was outstanding, to be coming from the pit lane at the start to get himself through to 5th position in the end of the race was just phenomenal. And probably a little bit understated too. Didn't hear too much about it in the press, but I just think it was a phenomenal drive, and he kept himself clean the whole way, which is, as we all know, a big thing to get to that checkered flag, right? As part of the task. So let's talk about Bahrain. Qualifying first of all, and expectation was that Red Bull was going to blow Mercedes away. It was a little bit closer than that, wasn't it, Christopher? What were your thoughts on qualifying in Bahrain?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hamilton is such a good driver, and which seems like a very obvious thing to say, but the way I think that manifests itself is that he always performs at the right times. So if you compare him to some other drivers who have spectacular results, but they're not there every time. So every time when it counts, Hamilton, I think, gets the best out of his car. And I think Bottas has done a good job, kind of where he is supporting that. And I think Verstappen is just an unbelievable talent. I think he has for the last few years been putting that Red Bull up, which I think is a narrative that sort of Red Bull agree with, and we'd see with the changes they've had with the second seat that kind of supports that. So I think for me, more than anything, qualifying was it was a bit of a blow for the likes of Aston Martin, but I think it was the first real reflection of we're actually going to have a great season here. We've got an opportunity to see two top teams genuinely really close, because so often you have testing that looks close, you come to qualifying and one team just, whether that was Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari in the past, just smashes it. So for me, it was a show of the class of the drivers at the top, and also a fantastic show of what we might have in the future.
Yep. Nikki, any thoughts around qualifying in Bahrain?
Yeah, I think it was great that Max was able to get pole for a start and take it to Mercedes. Again, going back to the Alpha Tauri, I think it was great qualifying from Pierre Gasly. And even Fernando Alonso was up there. I think he was P9 or something. I'm not sure. So yeah, it was great to see that there was a few different people in different positions, maybe not just at the top, but kind of throughout. So yeah, it was good. It's good to kind of show what we have to look forward to for the next, the next race and for the rest of the year, hopefully, and hopefully a bit more changes in that midfield as well.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the positions there for the start of the race. Do we feel as though McLaren were a little bit off where they were intending to be? Do you think? I was thinking McLaren was going to be probably the big surprise this year. I thought they might come through a bit stronger in qualifying, and Lando Norris did well, and so did Ricciardo as well in the race. But I think in terms of, I just thought they might be a bit closer. What are your thoughts around that McLaren and how they came out of Bahrain?
Yeah, it's a funny one for them, isn't it? I think they will be quick this year. I think that they sort of have everything in place to deliver. I think the reality probably is that the Mercedes and the Red Bulls are so quick at the moment that everyone is fighting for fifth place down. So you only need one or two outstanding performances or guys to absolutely hook up a great lap, and suddenly you're down in seventh or eighth, and it looks pretty average. So I think that sort of upper midfield section is very close and very crowded. But I think with the drivers that McLaren have got, I think that they are in a good position to capitalize on that. And I think also people have maybe overestimated the impact that changes to the Mercedes engine would make. Because I don't think the Renault engine was a bad one before, and I think the process of swapping over to a different power unit is a huge commitment. So to get that done, and to get that done effectively, and to perform in the first race is a good achievement in itself. And I think they'll probably see the dividends, if there is a benefit, further down the line. Really, I think it's a huge task to change engine, and I think they're probably getting used to that as we go, and things that the drivers can use the drivability and so on. So I think that partnership will take a little bit of time to gel, and we'll probably see them coming stronger in the middle of the season anyway.
Yeah, they had a phenomenally strong testing season this year, McLaren did, and I think they were probably number 1 or 2 as far as number of laps completed during testing. And it was interesting to hear Daniel Ricciardo's comments after the race in Bahrain, and just saying, he didn't feel as though he was 100 miles away from being together with the car, and he thought that maybe in the next 1 or 2 races he's going to get there. Nikki, what are your thoughts around McLaren? Were you thinking also they might be a little bit more of a standout than what they did in Bahrain?
Yeah, I maybe thought they were a bit would have been a bit better or higher up, but like Christopher said, like looking at it, it was so close between them, and Pierre Gasly was only just ahead of them. So like I think the gap there is so small that we will see it could be flipped around so easily in the next weekend, or the midfield or that upper midfield changing quite a bit, and that's what you want to see. You kind of don't want to just see the same positions all the time, and I think it'll make for good racing in that upper midfield portion. So I think, hopefully they'll be, higher up the next race, or at least challenging those that are around them, and we'll see what can happen.
Let's talk about Alpine, which used to be Renault. They came into the season with Fernando Alonso on board and Esteban Ocon. So what do we think of this new design of their car? Like, it looks like it's got some kind of a 747 engine sticking out the back of it behind their heads. What's this all about, Christopher?
It's brave, isn't it? Yeah, so they've basically moved elements of the cooling from the side pods up to being cooled through the top of the driver's head. So it's, I suppose as a team, from a team perspective, the challenge is always when you do something like that is you're going out on your own, and if it works, you look like a hero. And if it doesn't work, then everyone wonders why on earth you're trying to, reinvent the wheel. I think it's an interesting concept. I think, you can kind of see what they're trying to do. And when I saw it in testing, you kind of think, well, yeah, that's a logical step that as we go through the years, you might see getting closer and closer to that.
Yeah.
I think they had issues, didn't they, around overheating in Bahrain. And we'll see what happens. I think it's a brave decision, and we'll see how it ends up.
Nikki, with your engineering background, when you see a car like that that's got a significant visual difference to the rest of the grid, do you kind of get a bit excited to understand a little bit more what's going on there? Do you dive a bit deeper into the design?
Not so much. I feel like there's always so many different changing components on them that you kind of be, lost down a rabbit hole trying to understand everything that they're trying to do from a design point of view. I suppose my experience is more in the data engineering side, not so much in the design. But yeah, I think it's cool that every year you look forward to the unveiling of the cars and see, what kind of concepts they've come up with, or additional aerodynamic elements that they've gone with, and what the purpose behind them is. It's always nice to kind of understand a little where they're thinking and what their design is trying to achieve. So, but I wouldn't be too heavily involved in understanding the intricacies of it. But yeah, I think it's nice that different teams are trying different things, and that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? Trying to engineer something new and innovative. And it looks like Alpine are, like Christopher said, being brave with their choices and seeing what they can do with something a little bit different.
I guess it's a good year to do it, isn't it? We've got a transition year. So if you come out with a crazy design that happens to work this year and you run away with some great points and all the rest of it, then it's a bonus, isn't it? Whereas if it doesn't work, you can kind of say, well, we're looking forward to next year anyway, and major regulation changes. So let's get into the Bahrain race. Unfortunately, it was marred a little bit with one major incident that we'll talk about, and this is the old famous story about track limits, which happens in just about in every Grand Prix. So for those that are listening and watching today and you didn't know much about what happened in the Bahrain Grand Prix, Max Verstappen was leading the race with not too many laps to go, and he was told by the officials that he had to give back his position to Lewis Hamilton because he went off the extremities of the track, which other drivers had been doing throughout the race, and it seems as though the rules were changed midstream. Is this the case, Nikki? Is this how we saw it, or do you think it was all fair game to tell Max to give up his position there?
Well, I think there was a point where, Lewis's engineer told him that he had to be careful of exceeding track limits, and he kind of just responded and was like, I've been doing the same thing every lap. And then to see Max being punished for it or being told to give up his position. But I think you can kind of argue that point a little bit, but I suppose when I think about it, I just wonder, could Max have maybe made the pass at a different location and set it up a little bit better, so that you wouldn't have actually run into that problem. That was maybe what I was thinking, more so than just kind of like, I feel like in sport there's these rules that are like down to interpretation of the ref. If I can think about it in sport, like in my sport in hockey, there's situations where you can't really rely on the ref, because it's at their discretion sometimes. So you kind of have to always kind of make sure, well, let's not leave it that we're going to leave it up to them to decide whether the pass can be made or not. That you made it, you make it up to yourself that you've made the pass, and there is no room for any discretion or anything. So I think Max maybe could have made his pass at a different stage, or set it up a little bit differently, because he knew he was going to catch him. He knew he was going to be in a position to pass him. So it was just about making sure that where he did make that move, he wasn't going to run into that issue of exceeding track limits. That was just my opinion, though.
Yeah, fair call. What about you, Christopher? Was it taken away from Max, or did Lewis win it genuinely?
No. I mean, and there's a few issues in there. I think no, it wasn't taken away from him, because he was off the track when he overtook. I think to sort of continue Nicky's point, if you look at turn 4, when you go around the outside, when Max was around the outside, all Hamilton was ever going to do was squeeze him out, right? If you're the driver on the inside there, it's the easiest thing in the world to just drift, and suddenly the guy on the outside is off the track, right? So I can't see how, with a driver like Hamilton, that move was ever going to end differently, because he's too smart for it to. So sort of from a technical driving perspective, if you like, that was always going to happen. I think either, like Nikki said, either you gain an advantage by going off, beyond track limits, or you don't. And if Max clearly gained an advantage at that point, but so did Hamilton, like you say, every other lap, and what's it worth? Like a tenth and a half? I don't know. If you put that over the course of a race, that's a significant advantage. So I think it was the absolute right decision by the stewards in the overtake. But I think also, in every other series, not every series, a lot of the junior series, track limits are enforced properly, right? If you go to WEC, if you look at F3, they are enforced. And in F1, it seems much more sporadic. But you would think, the argument for me is saying, oh, well, it's a different track, so the runoff doesn't, you can't do anything about it. It doesn't really stand up, because, it shouldn't be beyond us as an industry to have sensors in the car that just say, look, for me, if you run over this point, then you get a reduction in your power, your available power, whatever, for 2 seconds or 3 seconds or whatever. So then you get a non-fatal, if you like. You say we'll put walls up, but you get like a non-race ending issue. Just go away if you pass a certain point. Just completely take it out of human interpretation and just say, right, you go past a certain point, you get a power cut. And I think that would solve it.
So do you think if the call hadn't been made and Max did win the race, do you think Mercedes would have put in a protest?
100%. 100%. Yeah, and rightly so, because it was against the regulations, wasn't it? It was a great move, but it was against the regulations. So, and you got to have limits at some point.
I think Toto already had the red card out, and he was heading up to the stewards box.
Already half the way up there, wasn't it?
Yeah. So look, let's. Whoops, wrong one. Let me just take that away. That is the name of our show, folks, and I've done it again. Here we go. We're looking at the race results from Bahrain. So anything there that particularly stands out? I think Lando had a good race to get fourth and was pretty strong, although I think another couple of laps and Sergio would have got him, wouldn't he?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And what about the Ferraris? We haven't talked about them at all so far today. Overwhelming, underwhelming? Charles drove a good race, I thought, to get into sixth position, but is the Ferrari still there this year, or are we going to see another year of Ferrari not reaching their potential?
I think Ferrari have probably been at their potential, unfortunately, for the last year or so. I think with Leclerc in particular, I think they've got an unbelievable driver there. I think for my money, again, if you watch him in the junior formula, he was unbelievable. His car control was incredible, particularly, if you watch him on the street tracks in F3 and stuff. I think as a driver, again, going back to what we were saying about Hamilton, about getting the most out of the car, and Verstappen getting the most out of whatever you've got. I think Leclerc is absolutely up there. And I think he's got a lot of love and a lot of support from Ferrari internally, which I think will really help him. So, I think it's difficult I think it's difficult to say after one race. I mean, they certainly performed better in Bahrain than you'd expect from testing, and they performed better than they did, last year. I hope it is the start of them improving, but I suspect it might not be quite there yet.
Nicci, thoughts on Ferrari?
Yeah, I think same as what Christopher said. I'm not excited by them, if that kind of explains it. So you're not really sure that they're going to be much of a challenge. But I think if anyone is to probably do it, it's going to be Charles. And you just hope that they can make some gains throughout the year. I've always been a big fan of Charles Leclerc. I've really liked him since he started, and when he first came to Ferrari, I thought, okay, here we go, this is going to be good. But yeah, I think they are sort of a little bit flatlining at the minute, and they're trying to find that little bit of, pep in their step that they need. But who knows? Like maybe he can challenge this year. But yeah, I'm not too sure on that.
Well, there was a lot of talk about their power unit being, greatly increased over last year. I don't think it's hit the numbers that they were expecting, I think, in terms of what we saw in Bahrain. And as we know, if the power unit's not producing the optimal level, then it has an impact on the rest of the car as well. So, but I'm going to say something here. I'm going to put myself on the record here. I'm going to say that Carlos Sainz is going to win a Grand Prix this year. There you go. I'm going to say that right here, right now on the first show. I've got a lot of time for the young junior Sainz. I think he's a great driver. I think he's going to show people in that Ferrari as he gets to grips with it that he can really do something. That's not underplaying Charles's ability. I think he's a fantastic driver, but I think there's going to be an occasion this year where somebody gets into trouble. It might be a wet track or something, and we see Carlos Sainz standing on the top step of the podium. So you heard it here first, folks. That's my prediction for this year. Okay, so Bahrain came and gone, and now we're moving on to Imola this weekend. And as I said to everybody off air before we started the show today, the Formula One World Championship has decided that they're going to delay or change the scheduling a little bit on Saturday for practice and qualifying, and that's due to Prince Philip's funeral that will be taking place in the UK at that time. So a great tribute to Prince Philip. The Formula One family is going to down tools for a couple of hours to make sure that that funeral goes ahead, and then they'll be back in action on the track. What are we expecting to see in the second race of the season, team? Are we going to see that battle between Red Bull and Mercedes continue, or do we think someone else is going to leap out of the pack and cause a bit of a surprise in Imola? What do you think there, Nicci?
I think it's probably going to be Red Bull and Mercedes. Just hopefully that we can see maybe Sergio being up there to challenge too. And yeah, I don't know if it's going to be any of the other teams that are going to be able for Red Bull or Mercedes, but I would like to see how Sergio gets on maybe in that battle for the podium or the pole position.
What are your thoughts on Valtteri Bottas? You're a Williams fan, so George Russell's sitting there. He's waiting for his time to jump into that silver arrow and take off. So do you think Bottas's last season is coming up this year?
Yeah, like I suppose when I watched Russell do the job that he did when he got the chance, I was like, oh my God, he's brilliant. Like, get him in there. But then he wasn't up against Lewis Hamilton, I suppose, that weekend because he wasn't racing. So it's a hard one. Like, I think Bottas is a really good driver, but because he's always just there or thereabouts when he's challenging Lewis, you'd just like to see him, I don't know, just make that gap just a bit smaller and really be a threat to him. Whereas I don't think Lewis does see him as a huge threat. I think he keeps him moving forward. He keeps pushing him on a little bit, but it would be interesting to see what another driver could maybe do in the Mercedes. And I think that's the only really real way to see how good Valtteri actually is, if you put another driver in there to challenge Lewis in the same car. So.
Okay. So, Christopher, what are we going to see? Red Bull versus Mercedes again this weekend? What's your prediction?
Yeah, I think so. I think 100%, yeah. And I think just to jump back a little bit on the Bottas question, I think Bottas will be Mercedes as long as Hamilton's at Mercedes, because if you were the Mercedes manager, teams don't pick drivers because of fans; they pick drivers because of what they deliver. And I think if you look at the results, I don't see any reason to change it. You've got Hamilton out there doing the business, winning, and you've got Bottas, who more often than not is second, or at the very worst third. So I don't know what, and Hamilton, who's your start, he's your championship winner, right? So you wouldn't want to do anything to unsettle him. So if you bring Russell into that, or anyone into that, aside of the performance dynamic, you've got a personal dynamic which will necessarily change. So if I was Mercedes, I would keep Bottas. I think he's doing a fantastic job for Mercedes. I think he personally would be frustrated where he's at. But I think that he's doing exactly what Mercedes would want of him. And, you've got to remember that wherever it was 5 years ago, Bottas was George Russell. Bottas was the next absolute superstar that we were all frustrated was in a Williams when he should really have been the top team. So I think Mercedes have got a great job. And I think next time they change drivers, they might bring Russell in alongside Bottas if Hamilton retires. But I think they'll keep Bottas as long as they keep Hamilton.
Let's talk about the green machine. We've got Aston Martin with Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel. Not a happy weekend for them in Bahrain. They'll be looking to improve in Imola this weekend. Do we see that happening? Nikki, what are your thoughts around the green machine?
Yeah, I think so. I think they probably have a better weekend this weekend. They obviously finished off the back of last year quite well. So yeah, maybe hopefully it's just a bad start to the season and they can be a lot more competitive this weekend. But I look forward to seeing. Maybe it's the change up in the drivers. I don't know. Could be part of it.
So are we talking top five, Nikki, for one of the cars, one of the Aston Martins?
That would be a great step. I'd say top 7, maybe.
Top 7.
8.
Okay, we'll hold you to that. We'll see. And who's it going to be? Is it going to be Lance Stroll or Sebastian Vettel? Vettel. Okay, top 7 position for Vettel. What are your thoughts on the green machine, Christopher? Are they going to rebound a little bit this weekend?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think they'll struggle because I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. You're already fighting for 5th. If they do finish 5th, then they've beat some pretty stiff competition from the likes of McLaren. So I think they will continue to struggle a little bit. I think they have been hurt by the regulations around the rate that we discussed earlier. So, they maybe don't have Mercedes resources to combat that once they realise that they're in trouble. I would like to see them perform. I think we will see Vettel back to, not necessarily his best, but back to performing well. I think that Bahrain was a bit of a one-off, and it's the mistake that he made in the race is maybe one for his experience, but it's an easy one to do. Where you move out, someone gets past you, you move back in, you suddenly lose your downforce, and you as a driver you kind of lose a little bit of perspective as well, and it's very easy to get sucked in and just end up in the back. It happens every weekend with different drivers, and so I wouldn't necessarily see that as the start of a trend. I know he struggled in qualifying, but again, first qualifying of the season, new car, new power unit, everything for him. So I would hope so, and I think as we go through the year, I would expect Aston to get some good results and move up the field.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to put you both on the spot now. Let's talk qualifying this coming weekend. Who are your top 3 drivers in qualifying, Nikki, for this weekend?
Max, Sergio, Lewis.
In that order, Max, Sergio and Lewis. Wow, 2 Red Bulls and a Mercedes. Okay, Christopher, what do you think?
Same drivers, but I think probably why copy? I'm not going to copy. I'm going to go Hamilton, Verstappen, Perez.
Hamilton, Verstappen, Perez. Yeah, okay.
Ahead of Bottas.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, but just to be a little bit different, I'll change up the Perez one and say that I think that one of the McLarens is going to get in the 3rd position on the podium this weekend for qualifying anyway. So let's talk race proper this weekend. And do we see that podium for the qualifying that you've just said, Nikki, going through and being the podium for the race, or are you going to change it up a bit?
Yeah, I'd say if it was to be that, I think I'd like to see Perez challenge Max, but I think it could probably end up being, as long as they don't all take each other out, then the same for the podium.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Christopher, are you going to stick with the same for the race finish, or are you going to change it up?
Yeah, I think so. I think what will be interesting is, 4 to 10. If you like, I think that will be. I think Imola is a good track, and it's a tough track, and it's fairly unforgiving. So it'd be interesting to see what happens in that kind of upper midfield battle for me.
Yeah,
I think we've got some really interesting stories there.
So any standout drivers that you think we're going to see this weekend? We had Tsunoda doing his stuff in Bahrain. Is there anybody that you think is going to have a better weekend in Bahrain than they did in Bahrain?
I'd like to see something from Ricciardo. I think it will be a situation that suits Ricciardo, and I think being a race in, we'll kind of start to see a bit more where he's at. So Ricciardo would probably be my
standout for the weekend. Okay, Nikki, you got a standout coming up this weekend?
I'm going to go Fernando Alonso.
Fernando.
See what he can do this weekend.
Okay. So Alonso top 7, do you think, Nikki, or what?
Top 7. Top 7, yeah.
Top 7. Okay, so Alonso in the top 7, and also Sebastian Vettel. So it's going to be an interesting weekend for Nikki watching this Imola Grand Prix, that's for sure. So, okay. Well, before we go today, I just wanted to have... or ask you a question, Nikki, about women in motorsport, and in particular the project that you're involved in. It's very inspirational. I'm sure the audience today would like to hear a little bit about what the motivation and inspiration has been for you to get Formula Female up and running.
Yeah, I think, I started Formula Female in 2018 off the back of my experience of working in the sport in the States and studying the sport in England, in Cranfield. So basically was the only female engineer in the paddock when I was working for Juncos Racing in the Indy Light Series, and I was the only female in my engineering class in Cranfield. And it wasn't that, it was a tough experience, and it was a difficult course, and it was hard work when I had very little experience going in, but it was actually the great time that I had and the positive experience that I had in both, that I felt I wanted to share with the next generation of young girls, or even young women who are still maybe trying to make career decisions and looking for something a little bit different, or if they're wanted to go down an engineering route. That I felt that this would be a great way to open up the sport and to highlight the different career opportunities that were involved in motorsport. So I set up Formula Female as a platform just to kind of initially just raise the visibility of the amount of girls that actually were in the sport in different series. And, it was only when I started to do the research on that I did find a lot of women actually, working within teams as engineers or mechanics, or, in the business end of it, or marketing and things like that. And that became the start of it, trying to raise the visibility of different females in the sport. But then I wanted to try and do something where I could actually introduce young girls to the sport and give them engage them with what different roles that are involved in it. So in 2019 I launched what was called the Go Girls Karting and STEM initiative, which was a program to introduce over 1,000 young schoolgirls to motorsport and to get them in behind the wheel so they could experience what it's like to drive a kart for the very first time. Like, a lot of these girls had never even seen a go-kart before. And also then for them to engage in a motorsport STEM workshop. So we use motorsport as a platform to teach science, technology, engineering, and maths, and to give them, access to female role models that we have in the sport, and to hear their stories and how they became involved in the sport, and the different opportunities that they had to, make a career in it, and just, I suppose, empower them to feel like that this is something that they could do, and that this is an option for them going forward. And just because they're not, born into a motorsport family doesn't mean to say that they can't actually find their way in motorsport, and they can't become a driver, they can't become an engineer or a mechanic or anything like that. So the program's been great. We launched it in 2019 and we ran it in 2020 up until COVID hit, and we're funded by CJJ Motorsports, which is founded by John Campion, and Sport Ireland as well. So it's a women in sport initiative here in Ireland that we're trying to use to encourage more young girls to participate in sport, but also to consider motorsport and STEM subjects as viable career options for them. So we're looking forward to getting that back up and running, and we've just secured funding again for a second year, which will start in late 2021.
Yeah, brilliant stuff.
So that's a little bit about Formula Female.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And if you're out there watching or listening to the show today and you want to know more about Nikki and what the team are doing there at Formula Female, I'm going to put all the details in the description of this particular show so you can find out more. When Nikki talks about them actually securing funding for another year, there's never an opportunity that goes by where additional funding is not looked after as a great thing. So if you're out there and you've got some interest in investing in ladies in motorsport, then Nikki's got a wonderful project. So I do ask you to get in touch if you want to know a little bit more about it. Christopher, how long is it going to be before we see a Formula One female driver on the grid?
That's a good question. I mean, ultimately, like you're saying that, it's down to money, right? So, you've got to have a driver, you've got to put them in the right position, and they've got to have the right experience to get in there. So, Lance Stroll gets a pretty bad rep because his father's, but if you look at the kids that have got into Formula One recently, they're either on a very particular manufacturer program or, huge amount of testing, Lando Norris, huge amount of testing, huge amount of money, huge amount of racing experience. So basically, we just need to put the environment around a young driver to get them into that point. There's absolutely no, physical reason or talent reason why we won't get one. So, Nikki and I are both working with Alex Covey, a young Irish karter who's racing around the Euro Series at the moment. We feel that she has the potential, as a driver to forge a professional career and maybe get up to Formula One. So it's just really about building an environment around the female. It's a funnel, isn't it? And at the moment, any number of kids go in the top, but 95% or whatever are male. So the ones that come out the bottom are male. It's as simple as that, really. So with Nikki's program, the more that women we can bring in the top, the better it will be. And then you need support at each of the levels. But I think it'll be relatively soon, because I think that once you get, a couple of women who have that background, have that ability, and have had that investment, we'll find that the commercial argument for having a woman in there is enormous. So the opportunities will come, but I think we're in a bit of a period now where a lot of great work has been done, and we'll see the results down the line in maybe 5 or 6 years' time, I'd say.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, it's been great to have you both on the show today. Thank you very much for giving me of your time, and good luck with your picks for this weekend in Imola. I'll be dropping you both a note after the race to see whether you're heroes or zeros, and we'll see who's going to come out on top. But I think we're going to see another Red Bull and Mercedes battle this weekend in Italy. So we'll wait and see, and we'll catch up again soon. So thank you for joining me on the Motorsport Show here on the Global Sports Channel, Nikki and Christopher.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you.
There we are, folks. That's the first episode of the Global Sports Channel Motor Show and Motorsport Show, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Nikki and with Christopher today. We did a bit of a review on the Bahrain Grand Prix, the first race of the season, won by Max Verstappen. No, it wasn't. It was won by Lewis Hamilton, of course. Yes, I keep saying that because I wanted Max to win that race really badly. So Mercedes are out on top, and we're going to see whether they can do that again this coming weekend at Imola, or whether Red Bull are going to give them a bit of a hard time. Now, if you haven't connected to us on social media, shame on you. You can. Global Sports Channel, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Check us out also on our website. If you're watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Hit that little notification bell and you'll be notified every time that we hit a video there for you. That's very much appreciated. So if you'd like to see something particular on the Motorsport show as we move forward, let us know. Drop us a note if there's a particular topic you'd like us to cover. We are going to talk about MotoGP and some of the other motorsports as we go forward. And of course, we've got the Extreme E Electric Series that's just started as well. So there's plenty to talk about in the motorsports world going on this year, 2021. Until next time, my name is Mark Philpott. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you all again very soon.